According to the Canadian government, climate change is making people mentally ill. I have so many jokes right now, but I'm going to keep them to myself for a minute. Blacklock's reporter got access to a document from the Canada Public Health Agency that warned of elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Guys, I want to laugh, I do, but I have to tell you the rest of this story. This is from the Blacklock's article. The report was called Climate Change Impacts on the Health of Canadians. In it, it read, climate change affects mental health due to changes in the prevalence and severity of natural disasters on human settlements. These events can cause anxiety-related responses and later potentially lead to chronic and severe mental disorders. Indigenous Northerners may be distressed by melting Arctic permafrost, while urban Canadians are threatened by sudden weather events. Elevated levels of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorders have been reported in populations who have experienced flooding and during slow-developing events such as prolonged droughts. Impacts include chronic distress and increased incidences of suicide. The Canada Public Health Agency also warned of an increase in deadly infectious diseases like West Nile, more cases of food poisoning, am I reading that right? More hospitalizations for heat-related illness, and a risk of increased exposure to toxic chemicals through floods. This is wacky and apocalyptic, I'll give them that. And the American Psychological Association actually agrees with the Canada Public Health Agency. They actually cite the emotional trauma caused by Hurricane Katrina as proof that overall climate change causes mental illness, PTSD, and whatnot, instead of it simply being proof of this psychological trauma attributed to the fact that a single enormous hurricane leveled your house and flooded your entire city. Now, this video here went viral this week because outlets like BuzzFeed and Al Jazeera and even the Canadian Environment Minister, Catherine McKenna, saw this sickly old polar bear with no snow around it as evidence of the impact of climate change on animals. Let's debunk this a little bit. The video was taken in August, so that explains the no snow. And the polar bear apparently had a broken leg, making it difficult for the polar bear to hunt and do all those things that polar bears like to do in a day. And the photographer who took the video of the bear backed up those explanations of the bear's conditions. And we all know, despite claims of catastrophic climate change eliminating Arctic ice flows and harming the polar bears, we know that there are more polar bears now than when biologists first started counting them. The population is healthy, probably even a little too healthy. So yeah, maybe climate change does make people a little sketchy up top. I mean, how sane can you really be to look at an old, sickly, starving bear with a broken leg in August and say that the natural life cycle of a polar bear is somehow evidence of climate change? Can we all just stop and appreciate for a minute that the very people who accuse climate change skeptics of being anti-science deniers, thinking that polar bears are some sort of immortal being that needs to be beamed directly into polar bear heaven, assumption of the Virgin Mary style. And climate change is just standing in the way of all that. Now, many First Nations and Aboriginal communities do not have access to clean drinking water. We have an opioid addiction crisis happening across the entire country, and it is affecting every single demographic in a very deadly way. And if the Canada Public Health Agency needs something more to do with their time and their money, let's talk about those things. Let's talk about how the Canadian government is considering decriminalizing not informing your sexual partners if you have HIV. That seems like a real public health issue, not a make-work project about people's feelings being affected by inclement weather based upon an emotional manipulation campaign with sad pictures of polar bears. Now, I might agree this time that climate change is making people act a little nutty, but I'm going to make a very important caveat to that claim. It's not really climate change that's damaging to people's mental health at all. I think it's the apocalyptic end times doomsday warnings about climate change that just never seem to come to fruition that can be damaging to someone's mental health. There's a very pervasive sense of guilt that we get handed to us by our alleged moral and intellectual superiors just because we want to live a comfortable first world existence. That probably isn't good for our mental health either. For the Rebel.media, I'm Sheila Gunn Reid. It is the Advent season, and Christians in the Middle East, and particularly northern Iraq, often don't have a place to worship the birth of Christ. If you can help us in our campaign to save the Christians in northern Iraq, go to SaveTheChristians.com.